Dean Martin walked onto the Copa Room stage, glanced at the front row, and knew tonight would be different. Because the man sitting there wasn't a threat. He was a guarantee. The Sands Hotel, Las Vegas. January 1963. The Copa Room was packed, every table filled, every booth occupied, cigarette smoke drifting through spotlight beams like ghosts. The orchestra was warming up, brass instruments catching the amber light. Women in cocktail dresses. Men in sharp suits. The kind of crowd that came to see Dean Martin sing and forget, for 90 minutes, that the world outside existed. Dean stood backstage, adjusting his bow tie in the mirror. He could hear the crowd's anticipation, that particular hum of expectation that always preceded his entrance. Frank had played the room 2 nights before. Sammy would close out the week. But tonight was Dean's night. His stage manager, Tommy, knocked twice on the dressing room door. 5 minutes, Dean. Thanks, Tommy. Dean's voice was steady. Always steady. That was the brand. Dean Martin didn't rush. Didn't panic. Didn't sweat. Tommy hesitated at the door. Dean, there's someone in the front row. Booth 7. I thought you should know. Dean turned from the mirror. Who? Tommy's face had gone pale. Vincent Marcello. The name hung in the air like smoke. Vincent Marcello. Not the kind of name you said loudly in Las Vegas. Not the kind of man you wanted noticing you existed. He owned things. Casinos, construction companies, politicians. The kind of ownership that didn't appear on any legal documents, but everyone understood anyway. What's he doing here? Dean asked, his voice still calm, but something had shifted in his eyes. I don't know. He just showed up. With 2 guys. They're sitting front row center. Haven't ordered drinks. Haven't said a word. Just sitting there. Dean picked up his cigarette case from the dressing table, opened it, closed it, set it back down. A small ritual. A moment to think. Does Frank know? Frank's in Palm Springs. Sammy? Also gone. You're on your own tonight, Dean. Dean looked at himself in the mirror one more time. The tuxedo was perfect. The hair was perfect. The face was composed. The king of cool. Except his hands, for just a second, weren't entirely steady. He smiled at his reflection. Then I guess we'd better give them a show. The lights dimmed. The orchestra played his entrance music. Dean Martin walked through the curtain into a wall of applause, and the smile he wore was so practiced, so perfect, that no one in the room could have guessed he'd just been told a predator was sitting in the front row. Dean didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. The room understood anyway. The first song went perfectly. That's amore. The crowd sang along to the Italian phrases. Dean moved across the stage with his signature ease. Microphone in one hand, the other gesturing in that casual, confident way that made it all look effortless. But his eyes kept drifting to booth 7. Vincent Marcello sat perfectly still. Mid-50s. Expensive suit. Hair slicked back. Hands folded on the white tablecloth. He wasn't smiling. Wasn't drinking. Wasn't doing anything except existing with the kind of presence that made the people at the tables near him unconsciously lean away. 2 men flanked him. Also motionless. Also not smiling. The rest of the front row had the energy of people trying very hard to pretend they were having a good time while sitting next to something dangerous. Dean finished the first song to thunderous applause. He took a sip of water, not the scotch everyone assumed was in his glass, actual water, and looked down at Marcello. Their eyes met. Marcello didn't nod. Didn't acknowledge. Just looked back with eyes that revealed nothing. Dean launched into the second song. Everybody loves somebody. His voice was smooth, effortless, but his stage manager Tommy, watching from the wings, noticed something the audience couldn't. Dean's grip on the microphone stand had tightened. Just slightly. Just enough. Halfway through the third verse, Dean saw Marcello lean forward. Not much. Just an inch. But in that slight movement, something communicated itself across the space between stage and floor. This wasn't a social visit. Dean Martin had been in this business long enough to read a room. And what this room was telling him, what that one man in the front row was telling him without saying a single word, was that tonight had a purpose beyond entertainment. The song ended. More applause. Dean smiled, thanked the crowd, started to introduce the next number. And then Vincent Marcello did something that changed everything. He placed both hands palm down on the table and started to stand up. The two men beside him immediately tensed. The tables nearby went silent. A spreading circle of hush that began at booth 7 and rippled outward like a stone dropped in still water. Even the orchestra sensed it, musicians glancing at each other uncertainly. Dean stopped talking mid-sentence. The microphone was still hot. 300 people and a dozen musicians waiting for him to continue. But Dean Martin, for the first time in 20 years of performing, simply stood there watching a man in the front row stand up. Marcello was now fully upright. Still not smiling. Still not speaking. Just standing there, his eyes locked on Dean. And then he began walking toward the stage. Subscribe and leave a comment, because the most powerful part of this story is still ahead. The bodyguards moved to follow him. Marcello held up one hand, a small gesture, but they froze instantly. He would walk alone. Tommy was frantically gesturing from the wings. Get off the stage. Get out of there. But Dean didn't move. Didn't step back. Didn't run. He just stood there, one hand on the microphone stand, watching Vincent Marcello approach. The audience had gone completely silent. You could hear the air conditioning. Someone's champagne glass set down too hard on a table. The rustle of a woman's dress as she shifted nervously in her seat. Marcello reached the stage. He was shorter than he'd seemed sitting down, but somehow that made him more intimidating, not less. He looked up at Dean Martin with those expressionless eyes, and when he finally spoke, his voice was quiet. Conversational. Like they were two friends having a private chat. Mr. Martin. Beautiful show. As always. Dean's jaw tightened. But his voice, when it came, was steady. Thank you, Mr. Marcello. Glad you're enjoying yourself. I need to speak with you. After the show. Privately. My schedule's pretty full tonight. Maybe we could. It's not a request, Mr. Martin. The words hung in the air. Not loud. Not aggressive. Just a simple statement of fact delivered in a tone that suggested refusal wasn't an option that existed. Dean looked down at this man. At the two bodyguards still seated in booth 7, hands inside their jackets. At the audience frozen in their seats. At Tommy in the wings looking like he might be sick. At the orchestra waiting for some signal about what to do next. And Dean Martin made a choice. Ladies and gentlemen, Dean said, turning to address the full room but not stepping away from Marcello. We're going to take a short intermission. 15 minutes. The bar is open. Enjoy yourselves. The audience didn't move. No one wanted to be the first to break the tableau. Dean looked at the bandleader. Orchestra, take 15. The musicians started to pack up, but slowly, reluctantly, like they were afraid to miss what happened next. Dean turned back to Marcello. My dressing room. 5 minutes. We'll talk. Marcello nodded once. That's all I'm asking for. He turned and walked back to his booth, his bodyguards standing as he approached, the three of them moving as a unit toward the exit. The room exhaled. Conversations exploded at every table, nervous, rapid, everyone trying to process what they'd just witnessed. Dean set down the microphone carefully, precisely, and walked off stage. Tommy met him in the wings, face white. Dean, you can't go back there with him alone. You don't know what he wants. Call security. Call the police. Call. I know exactly what he wants, Dean said quietly. And security won't help. To understand what happened in that dressing room, you need to understand what had happened 3 weeks earlier. Dean's younger brother, Bill, had a gambling problem. Not the casual kind. The kind that got you in debt to people who didn't accept late payments. Bill had borrowed from the wrong casino, which was owned by the wrong people, which led to the wrong kind of phone calls at 3 in the morning. Dean had paid off Bill's debts twice before. Tens of thousands of dollars each time. And each time, Bill had promised it was the last time. That he was done. That he'd learned his lesson. 3 weeks ago, Bill had disappeared. Stopped answering his phone. Stopped showing up to work. His wife had called Dean, terrified, saying men in dark suits had come by the house asking where Bill was. Dean had made some calls. Quiet calls. To people who knew people. And what came back was a number, $87,000. That's what Bill owed. To an operation that Vincent Marcello had a piece of. Dean had been trying to arrange payment. But $87,000 wasn't something you just had lying around, even if you were Dean Martin. His accountant was working on it. His lawyer was making calls. But apparently, someone had decided that wasn't fast enough. Dean walked into his dressing room. Vincent Marcello was already there, sitting in Dean's chair, looking at himself in the mirror like he owned the place. The 2 bodyguards stood by the door. "Close it," Marcello said to the guards. They obeyed, and the room suddenly felt very small. Dean didn't sit. He stood by his dressing table, hands in his pockets, posture relaxed despite every instinct screaming at him to run. "You wanted to talk. So talk. Your brother owes me money. I'm aware. $87,000. Plus interest. It's been 3 weeks. That number's now $95,000. Dean's jaw tightened but his voice stayed level. "I'm working on it. Working on it isn't payment. You'll get your money." Marcello stood up slowly, walked over to the dressing table, picked up Dean's cigarette case. He opened it, looked at the contents, closed it, set it back down. The same gesture Dean had made an hour ago. Except when Marcello did it, it felt like a threat. "Here's the thing, Mr. Martin. I like you. I like your music. I like your movies. I think you're talented. I think you're smart. But your brother is stupid. And stupid costs money. My money. He's my brother. I'll cover it. I know you will. Because if you don't..." Marcello let the sentence hang unfinished. The guards by the door shifted slightly. "There's a lot of desert between here and California. Lot of places a body could disappear." Dean's hands came out of his pockets. His usual casual posture had evaporated. Now he was just a man facing down a threat to someone he loved. Don't what? Don't threaten my family." Marcello smiled for the first time. It wasn't a warm smile. "Mr. Martin, I'm not threatening. I'm explaining. You have 1 week. $95,000. Cash. No checks. No installment plans. Or your brother learns what happens to people who don't pay their debts. Do we understand each other?" Backstage, Dean made a choice no one expected, because it wasn't for the cameras. Dean Martin looked at Vincent Marcello. At the 2 bodyguards. At his cigarette case on the table. At the career he'd built on never showing fear. "You'll have your money," Dean said quietly. "But you're leaving my dressing room now. And you're not coming back to my shows. Ever." Marcello's smile faded. "You giving me orders?" "I'm stating facts. You want your money? Fine. But you don't get to threaten me in my own dressing room and then sit in my audience like you own me." The bodyguards moved. Marcello held up a hand. "Careful, Mr. Martin. You be careful," Dean said, his voice still calm but carrying an edge that hadn't been there before. "You come into my show, you sit in my front row, you walk onto my stage like you own it. But you don't. This room, this stage, that's mine. And you just made sure everyone in that audience knows you're the kind of man who threatens performers in their own venue." Marcello's eyes narrowed. 1 week. 1 week. Dean agreed. "Now get out." Marcello walked to the door, stopped, looked back. You've got steel, Martin. I respect that. But steel breaks. Not tonight, it doesn't. Share and subscribe. Make sure this story is never forgotten. Dean paid the $95,000. It took every dollar he had saved and a loan against his next film. Bill went to rehab, real rehab, the kind that worked. He never gambled again. Vincent Marcello never returned to Dean's shows. And Dean Martin never spoke about that night. But the people who were there, who saw him face down a man everyone feared, who watched him refuse to be owned, they never forgot. That cigarette case stayed on Dean's dressing table for the rest of his career. A reminder that cool wasn't just an act. Sometimes it was survival.